heating up of the economy. The economy has become heated up. Why has the economy become heated up? Because it is increasingly going at a faster and a faster speed. We will look at the implications of this speeding up a little later, but the technical answers to climate change are also prescribed by this framework, without questioning this framework. And what are the prescriptions? Scientists are contemplating constructing a huge plate made from stainless steel or some material, which they want to float in the atmosphere, so that the radiations that come from the ozone hole can be reflected back, and the radiations don't come down, and there is no heating up of the economy. And this is a very serious issue. There is a whole book devoted to how a technological solution is possible to prevent radiations from the sun coming in through the ozone hole. The second level of intervention says carbon trading. Right? Carbon trading means if I produce X amount of carbon, I have to produce X amount of trees in order that the carbon that they produce get utilized. Since I don't have any land in my country to produce trees, so I will go to third world countries and go to people and say, look, I will give you money, you plant so many trees, and therefore my carbon footprint will become zero. In technical language, this is being called carbon colonialism. There is a very good essay in a journal which describes this as carbon colonialism. And the third thing that we are trying to do is to reduce our personal carbon footprint. So there are, if you go to the internet, there are tables and questionnaires which you fill, and you will know what your carbon footprint is, and you are therefore requested to reduce your carbon footprint by engaging in activities that do not produce so much carbon. The most difficult question here is, and I think this is the question that is the turning point in our debate, in our understanding. In our everyday life, the automobile industry is making very, very deep inroads. Right? Everybody has a car. And the government is very happy to give you loans for a car right there, immediately. You go to a bank and you say you want education loans, they will say that will take about 2 months. Right? And they can't give you more than 25% of your loan. Why? Because these loans are not easily recoverable. But if you want a loan for a car, even if your salary is not up to the mark, you get a loan there and then. The bank manager has the authority to sanction 5 lakh rupees for a car, but not 2.5 lakh rupees for education. So everybody is buying a car. And carbon release from the car is the biggest problem in carbon accumulation. So in New Zealand there was this discussion that can we stop manufacturing cars for a certain period? It was a very serious discussion. And the question was that what will we do with the labor and the infrastructure that has been created to manufacture these cars? And the answer was that that is going to create even worse carbon accumulation than the production of cars, and therefore this idea was thrown away. Within this framework, there is no solution to climate change. What is this framework? This is a framework that produces capital. As long as we think in the framework of capital, and as long as we think of changes that involve more investment of capital, climate change is going to get no solution. Why? My hypothesis is that capital to survive needs a huge reserve army of labor. Otherwise capital cannot survive. This is cheap labor. Surplus cheap labor is also called a reserve army of labor. So long as there is increasing rates of unemployment, your climate change is not going to increase. Unemployment is going to add to your climate change in ways that we don't even know. Now what do we mean by unemployment? Unemployment simply meant I have nothing to do. Neither do I have lots of time, but no work. This is one phase of unemployment. Right? Other phase of unemployment is I do so much work, but I don't get enough money for the work that I do. There are two very, very clear phases of unemployment that we see across in different parts of the world. I think that we need to have a labor-oriented perspective to understand climate change. And this perspective has at least two dimensions. In very simple, commonsensical language, we work on nature to create for ourselves our basic necessities. This is very simple. Suppose if we were to conceptually understand this as nature is an external component of our world. So we can say nature is part of the non-human natural world that we live in. And we are human beings, and there is an internal nature to us. Our mind, our philosophies, our thinking, our emotions. And production and reproduction happen when non-human nature and human nature begin to interact. Climate change is telling us that in the external nature, there is an immense problem. In external nature, because of the way in which the economy is heating up, and I mean heating up, that the speed at which you are drawing resources from nature is so fast, and the rate at which nature can reproduce these resources is not so fast. The gap between the two is creating the problem of exhaustion. Right? I am running at a speed of 5 miles an hour and I am not able to regenerate that energy fast. I can't go back to the field tomorrow. My stamina is not getting regenerated and I am confronting a condition of exhaustion. Right? This exhaustion is manifested in external nature by the depletion of biodiversity resources, by mining, etc., etc. Because none of these resources can regenerate in the lifetime in which capital will require it to be reproduced in order for capital to be invested in technologies for production. So the rate at which capital reproduces is the rate at which they need natural resources, and if they don't get the natural resources at that rate, then there is a problem, and that is one of the reasons why there is depletion of green cover, why carbon that is emitted is not getting absorbed, and why there is carbon accumulation in the atmosphere. Why? Because there is carbon accumulation in the atmosphere, therefore the ozone layer is depleting, and therefore there is radiation, and therefore all the problems that you create. So climate change is telling us of exhaustion in the natural world, external to us. Now this is an incomplete picture. There is something happened parallelly, which we have to keep in mind in order to get a holistic picture of the times that we are living in. Everybody has heard of AIDS, HIV, right? And the acronym says Acquired Immunodeficiency Syndrome, right? Forget about the particular virus. Look at the metaphor. That in the 21st century, the immunity systems of our body internally are declining. And this is not only manifested in AIDS, this is manifested in all the life cycle diseases that we are confronting. I fall ill today, it takes me 4 times more time to recover. I take antibiotics and I have to pay for it for the next 1 month. Antibiotics cures me in 3 days time, but I am recovering from antibiotics for the next 1 month. Everything that happens to us is exhaustion. Right? So parallelly what is happening is that the internal environment is also getting exhausted. And this is a serious crisis. The strength of an economy comes from the fact that external nature, non-human nature and human nature are both sturdy. Right? Then there is good productivity. But the external environment is getting weak, the internal environment is getting weak, and there are 2 weak organic units interacting with each other and creating a problem which we call climate change. Not only is external nature not able to recover, our internal nature is also not able to recover. Right? And when 2 weaklings come together, we have a phenomenon called climate change. I think this is a perspective that I would like to put table as a very important understanding of climate change. In other words, there is a problem in the external human nature, non-human nature, and there is a problem in the internal human nature, and both of them are getting weak, and two weak units, when they get together, they produce something called climate change. If this is the perspective of climate change, we can now try and understand what is it that we need to do in order to even begin to unravel and put forward questions which will help us to comprehend what climate change is and what we need to do for climate change.
You can do it later.
At this point, I want to make another suggestion. And that is that we need to open our minds to the possibility of plural paradigms of work, nation and productivity. Plural paradigms of productivity, of production and reproduction of social life. We only know one paradigm, and that paradigm is being used to understand everything that happens. And shifting cultivation is one example of the use of that one paradigm of work, nature, productivity to understand everything that happens in the world. And in this paradigm, a paradigm has three elements of definition of work, definition of nature, and definition of productivity. And I am saying that in India and across the world, these three terms are defined very differently. And there are many paradigms of work because the nature of work, the nature of productivity, and the nature of nature are differently conceived by different cultures. And I think that pluralism is very important to understand how we can address the problem of economy and its relationship to climate change. Having said this, I want to now position and describe to you what shifting cultivation, what Adivasi modes of livelihood actually are, and how can we understand Adivasi modes of livelihood in this scenario of climate change. How are we to position? This is very important. How are we to position Adivasi modes of livelihood in the light of this particular way of describing climate change? My argument is that in Adivasi modes of livelihood, there is a robust external environment, which is nature, the forest, and there is a robust internal environment, which is the human being. And these two robust units interact each other to produce what we call Adivasi livelihood. To give you an idea of the robustness of external environment, I will give you an example of how cultivation happens. I won't call it shifting cultivation, I will just call it cultivation. And to give you an example of robustness of our internal environment, I will give you examples of how people deal with illnesses and how do they handle problems of health. So let me begin with the internal environment, how robust it is. And I want to also say that so long as the external environment is robust, our internal environment will also be robust, and likewise, if my internal environment is robust, it is also a reflection of, it will also determine the robustness of the external environment. The level of pain that you can withstand, right, and the speed at which you can recover from fatigue is the test of your fitness. Which means, if you walk 100 miles, and if you can recover from that fatigue in 2 days' time, as against if you walk 100 miles, and it takes you 1 year to recover, there are two different understandings of fitness that we have in Adivasi society, and there are many reasons why that happens. You walk 75 miles, and it takes you not more than 2 hours to recover from the fatigue. You're back to work again. An example of this is, here is a friend of mine who was chasing a bear in the forest, and in the course of chasing a bear, a bamboo stick pierced from under his foot right across the ankle till his calf. This is the foot, it goes in here and comes out here. And he was in writhing pain when I met him. Because his pain was so much that even if you look at it, he would scream. That was the level of his pain. But if you don't look at it, he had a smiling face. So I said, look, you'll get a gangrene, I will take you to the doctor. He said, he laughed at me and said, you go. We'll see you 2 days later. I came back 2 days later, he was walking and running. I said, what did you do? It's very simple. It took me one day to prepare my mind to push the bamboo stick up so that I could see the little end on one side. It took me another day to prepare my mind to pull it out. I went to the forest, took some herbs, stuck it there, and I'm fine. This is the robustness of the inner self, of the inner human nature. External human nature, I'll describe to you what shifting cultivation actually ought to be. Shifting cultivation or cultivation of a plot in the forest is actually cultivation of the forest. This is only a byproduct of what you actually do. You are actually looking after the forest by making a small clearing for your own food. Right? So if you remove the forest from there, then it's simple agriculture. But if you want to see the relationship between the clearing, I won't call it a field, it's a clearing. When you cut the forest, right, you make a clearing, you don't make a field. In this clearing is in a very, very intimate, organic relationship with the forest that is around it. And this is how it works. And I'm assuming that you are giving that the Adivasi society has all the minimum conditions for productivity. And this is a fair demand. This is not an unfair demand. Any industrial unit demands its minimum conditions for productivity, which includes labor, finances, capital, technology, knowledge, etc., etc., etc. Right? And the industry will fight for it. So I am making a case that Adivasis should be given the basic conditions that they need to practice this. And what are the basic conditions? I am giving you a brief description of it. The people that I live with, and I practice shifting cultivation, झूम, उसको झूम भी नहीं बोलते, उसको पेंदा बोलते हैं. P-E-N-D-H-A, पेंदा. Pehnda is a way of describing the clearing and its regeneration. So, in the best scenario, where all the conditions are present, you have at least 24 clearings to make over a period of 48 years. 48 years.
Yes.
How does that happen? Your village is in the center and you have forested hills all around you. You cultivate one clearing and you move to the next. Then you move to the next, then you move to the next, unless you have covered all the 24 and you come back to the first one. Every plot of clearing takes at least 2 lunar years for cultivation. It is not, in their mindset, the unit of time is not 1 lunar year, but 2 lunar years.
For regeneration.
For regeneration. Because the work cycle is so much that by the time you harvested your crop, it is already into the second year. So by that you need to prepare your field, your clearing in the month of say May, but your threshing and your bringing the crop home does not end until end of May. So you have missed the cycle. You cannot start whenever you can. You have to go by cycles of nature. So when you miss the cycle, you have to do it. You have to wait for 1 full year until you get back to the beginning point. Right? It's a very important phenomenon is that your food lasts you only for 9 months. There are 3 months in every lunar year which are called Kagviku, which is periods of relative hunger. It is very important phenomena in this cycle. It is the phenomena of collective fallow.
Collective?
Fallow.
Fallow.
Fallow in the Adivasi language and philosophy is time for regeneration. It's a little bit of hunger is very important for regeneration. As we all know from our traditions that you should leave little space for at least 2 chapatis and not fill your stomach fully, right? The whole idea of fasting is very important. You should fast your body. Now this is a phenomenon that is practiced collectively for 3 to 4 months in an Adivasi society because nature does not give you very much. Nature is in its own cycle of reproduction. You've exhausted your food and for 3 months you are in a lean period of collective hunger. Food is wanting but you are not going to die. And then you begin the cycle again. So every plot, every clearing gets 48 years of regeneration. And that is a huge amount of time. 48 years of regeneration on one single plot. And what regenerates in that plot? Everything regenerates. You get all your fruits, you get all your vegetables, you all get all your berries, all your roots, all your non-grain food comes from there. All your proteins, all come from there. A very important feature of this cycle is that the forest is in the foundational position in the worldview. And this is very important. What does the foundational position mean? I will divert a bit to explain to you what I think a foundational position is, so that I can come back to it and explain to you how important it is. I began to ask myself the question, how do you value the forest? Especially when dams were being constructed, when forests are being cut, there is always this calculation of including the loss as part of your cost for making the dam. So I did some research and found out how do they cost the value of a forest for which compensation has to be given. And my research told me they don't do it. It just can't be done. So the next question was, how do you value things that are invaluable? There must be some economic theory about valuing things which cannot be valued in money. How do you value that? And I found a very interesting article written by a lawyer who is trying to understand how to frame laws and jurisprudence practices for the destruction of immensely valuable heritage for which there is no price. And forest is one of those heritages. And he said, value is created in so many ways in economics. Scarcity creates value, labor creates value, right? Uniqueness creates value. But none of these theories of value actually apply to something that is invaluable in monetary terms. You have no parameter in mathematics to value forests. Why? Because the topsoil that you create in the forest is created over many hundreds of years. And there is no way to estimate what this topsoil is, how much it is created. A friend of mine, Vasant Phutani, who is practicing organic farming somewhere near Nagpur, he once told me that his mission in life is to create 1 inch of topsoil before he dies. That's what he wants to leave for the next generation. Right? And I realized that this is a very huge task. Now, foundational position is therefore a concept that has been invented to suggest that things that have no value in these senses are actually in the foundation of a worldview. You remove that and everything falls. And the metaphor is that if in a building you remove the foundational pillar, the building falls. That position in your worldview, which will hold everything together, right, is given to those things which cannot be valued in money. And those things have value, which is called the value of the foundational position. Right? Now, when the forest is in a foundational position, then you get a different worldview. To put the forest in a foundational position means that the tree is there in the center of a worldview, determining everything else that you will do. I will not go into what does it mean to have a tree in the center of a worldview, because we don't know what a tree is actually. When I came back from the forest and I asked botanists what is a tree, they had no answer to it. They said, what is a tree? Tree is xylem, phloem, monocotyledon, dicotyledon, so many years, so many rings. But what is a tree? No idea. And Adivasis have a very good understanding of what a tree is. The multiple paradigms of production, work nation production, are of two types. One in which the tree or the forest is in the foundational position, and the other in which the forest is not in the foundational position, in which money is in the foundational position. Right? And climate change is a product of a worldview in which the forest is not in the foundational position, in which money is in the foundation, in which capital is in the foundation. And we cannot equate the two and say that one is to be compared with the other because they do two different things altogether. And my last point is, the crisis of the economy is that we produce exchange value and we don't produce use value. And what is use value? I think I need a little explanation on that. Use value, as we understand today, means a list of attributes that a material has that can be harnessed for production. So wood has certain properties, right? And those properties can be used to make a table, they can be used to make a chair, they can be used to make a stool, they can be used to make a building, right? Similarly, copper has certain properties which can be used for industrial production. Now this is a very, very superficial understanding of what use value is. This is a very utilitarian understanding of use value. Use value actually is potentiality. Right? It is not these attributes, it is those processes which actually create these attributes. That is of use value. The reproduction of Earth, the Earth's capacity to self-reproduce is of use value. And not that the Earth has sulfur, the Earth has copper, the Earth has manganese. That is only a peripheral, a very, very limited understanding of use value. The crisis today is that nobody produces use value. In other words, when we produce exchange value, we are undermining potentiality every day. And a result of the undermining potentiality is exhaustion. Exhaustion is a proof of the fact that your potentiality has got undermined. That means that you are not able to regenerate, you are not able to recuperate, you are not able to fight your exhaustion on your own steam. There is a very interesting book which discusses this. It's called Crack Capitalism. Yeah.
Who's the author?
I'll just get the author in a minute. It's a very interesting book, and this book, he gives a very good example of what it means. He says, if you have a choice, this is a very good explanation of use value. He says, if you have a choice between celebrating your son's birthday and going to a conference where you're going to get a contract of 20 crore rupees, which one would you choose? If you choose the contract, you are contributing to exchange value. And if you choose your son's birthday party, you're contributing to use value. Right? And he says, please count for yourself, in a day, how much you contribute to use value and how much you contribute to exchange value by this parameter. So if you have not gone to the party, for that moment you have defeated capitalism, if not for the rest of your life. We need economies, we need production paradigms which will produce and reproduce use value, which will enrich potentiality. We have enough of exchange value that will undermine potentiality. And I am suggesting that Adivasi livelihoods have the capacity and understanding to enrich potentiality. They can help us to regenerate use value in a deeper sense of the word. I would therefore like to place them on the frontiers. We cannot become Adivasis because there is no forest available. But there are lots of things that we can learn. And the first thing that we can learn is not to forget. You see, we forget very soon because we are so involved in the production of exchange values that we don't even realize that we are losing in exchange use value. Adivasis need to be on the top in order to keep reminding us that we have to work hard to enhance and enrich the processes that produce use value. We can't do away with exchange value because that is how the world is. But certainly we can make efforts to enrich use value in order to counter climate change. Reducing your carbon footprint is one small measure of enriching use value. There are two different notions of creativity involved. And with this I end. The creativity of exchange value is premised on novelty. Everything has to be new. This pen can be made novel by just adding one color here. Value addition. Its price will go up by 10 rupees. You add one more frill here, novelty. Novelty is